All right, we are doing 100 videos, one per day for the first 100 days of 2025. This is video number 5. Let's get to it. So if you haven't been following along, these videos are meant to be helpful and practical, especially for your real estate investing journey. And so today's topic is, for those of you who don't know, I am born and raised in Louisiana. I've got ties to South Mississippi. I am from the South and we have freezing weather coming. So I want to go ahead and I want to talk about being a landlord. I've been in this business for the last 10 years. Let's talk about how to prepare for freezing weather, especially if you're a property owner in the South, because we're not ready for this stuff. We don't have normal, for you folks who are in the North, you always kind of joke at us because we freak out, but we don't have things like salt trucks and whatnot. I think I was 21 when I saw snow for the first time in my life, or at least that I could remember. Maybe I saw it briefly, some snow flurries as a kid, right? And so this is not something that our infrastructure is prepared for. We do not encounter it frequently like our friends in the North, and so therefore it is not a habit that many people have. So let's start talking about how do you prepare properties and how do you deal with it as a property owner, a landlord. So first thing I want to talk about is if you have a property that's vacant. So maybe it's vacant because you just bought it. Maybe it's for sale. It is for rent. Maybe you're in between tenants. Maybe it is under construction. Let's talk through that. And I've got some notes I'm going to be referencing, so just know that. First thing that's really important, anytime I buy a property, I want to know where the shutoff valve is. The reason why that's so important is because, first of all, if it is hard to get to, or if you don't know where it is, the worst time to have to know where it is in the event of emergency when you need to actually shut it off. So this is really important to know where it is. And actually, it's something that I keep in my file for the property is, this is where the main shutoff valve is. If there is other shutoff valves, like maybe a section, a shutoff valve that cuts off a section, it's also good to note that, but not every house has that. Um, when I have properties that are vacant, so we've got this freezing weather coming here in the next few days here in the greater New Orleans area, but I've got properties in 2 states and basically over a pretty large geographical region. Some of my properties are more than an hour apart from each other, and some are closer to the water, some are, closer, more north. And so, those things are important to understand. So I've been prepping, all of the properties, and I'll talk with you next what to do when it's occupied. But for now, especially all the vacant ones, those are the ones that are most at risk. So ones that are vacant, and then ones that have older plumbing, and then ones that are raised. Those are the three biggest risk. Um, those are always going to be the ones that I am going to spend the most time prepping and focusing on. So if it's vacant again, you want to make sure you want to insulate the exterior pipes, right? So you want to go get that foam looking long cylinder one that you can buy in the store. I'll be honest, we keep that stuff in stock and for in our storage because the it can always be difficult to kind of get, especially when a freeze is coming. It's like people, they go out and they stock it, right? And it sometimes they run out. So we're going to cover and insulate the exterior pipes. So that's usually where the hose bib is. And then if you have a raised house, there may be some underneath that we will look to insulate as well. So not only do we put that on there, but we want to make sure we use electrical tape and we tape it so that it's staying on there. The other thing is that I remove all hoses, from the actual exterior hose bib. I'm going to remove that. And then I'm also going to cover that hose spigot. There's those fancy little things that you can put over the hose spigot. Um, but at the end of the day, if you do not have access to supplies, this is when you need to get creative. We have used everything from trash bags, plastic bags, rags, blankets, moving blankets, various things like that. Um, you also want to, what I do is I go turn it off when it's vacant. I go turn it off at the meter. So I stop all water from getting into the property. Now, if you are sophisticated enough that you know how to do this, you can send a pressure through the line and you can actually clear all the water through the actual plumbing lines. I myself, number one, don't go around doing that. What we do is we turn it off um, at the main line. So if it's city utilities, you're going to cutting it off where the meter is. So turning off that valve there. Or for example, if it's private, like if you have a well, we turn it off at the well. And then what I'm going to go do is I'm going to go open up the exterior hose bibs. And what will happen is you'll see water come out, but then it stops, right? Like basically there's only a little bit in there. That's what you want to remove from the plumbing system, is any water stuck in the line. So I do that on the exterior hose bibs, and I want to keep them open, basically open and breathing, not harboring any water that's left over. Inside, we go in and we open up the faucets for in the kitchens, the bathrooms. If you have, like, for example, something in your wash, like in your laundry room, right? You want to open up those faucets. Again, there's going to be some water left in that system that you want to remove. The next thing that we do is we go to the toilet. In the back of the commode, you've got that storage of where they that holds the water. We're then going to flush it and remove the water from the back part of that toilet. Um, we're going to put the heat on reasonably. I've heard anywhere from 50 to 60 degrees. We generally put it at 60 degrees on heat because you want to keep the place generally warm. And again, when they're vacant, we generally have the power on. If you do not have the power on, it is going to put the property a little bit more at risk, but not at the same time. If we have it on, we're going to use it all day long. So put the heat on at a reasonable temperature between 50 to 60 degrees. Again, we use 60. And then what I do is I open all the cabinets to where, underneath the sinks, so that those pipes have in like some they get access to the heat. If there's an attic, you want to pull down the attic just a little bit so that up there the pipes up in the attic have some access from the heat as well. So those are some of the things that we do if the property is vacant. We go in and we make sure that we turn off the water. We get all the existing water out of the lines, and we want to make sure we leave it nice and cozy. But these are going to be the properties we check in on the most because they are vacant. And so if something happens, there's no one there to tell us. Pro tip: when the freeze is over, this is when you want to go back and when you turn the water back on, you want to be very mindful of basically the situation. You want to be mindful that you are not turning the faucets off and then opening the valve, because that can actually mess with your pressure in your lines. So some of you guys know I'm on the WWL Home Improvement Show in New Orleans. It's one of the largest radio stations in the greater New Orleans area. And just on, it's a live call-in show. This was actually the biggest topic we talked about yesterday on the show. And someone called in that they had actually turned off the water before, but whenever they turned it back on, the guy's spouse, his wife, had basically shut off all the valves, not all the valves, all the faucets, because she was worried that, hey, you're going to turn the water on, whatever, you're having all these faucets open. Actually, what it ended up doing, it ended up busting his lines because of the pressure. So you want to keep them open, turn the water valve back on, and then go in. And then once the water starts flowing through, turn them off turn the faucets off when you're going to reset after the freeze. So that's something just to kind of think about on the back end. When you turn off, when you go to turn back on, be mindful of that. All right, second scenario: if you are under contract to buy a property, it is not your responsibility to prep the property. It is the seller's responsibility all the way up until closing. But I like to take responsibility in the sense of, I'm reaching out to the seller, reminding them, hey, do you mind if I ask, are you guys prepping the pipes? What are you guys up to? Hope you guys stay warm in all this. How can I help? Because I want them, number one, to continue to see me as an ally. But at the same time, I want this transaction to succeed. So do I have to? No. But do I do it? Yes. Last year in 2024, we had a freeze, and I was under contract to buy a property that was less than 2 blocks from the Lake Pontchartrain. And the seller was in a rehab facility. And so they were not physically able themselves, and they had friends and stuff kind of helping with the process, but I knew that I needed to step up and take a bigger, role in the process to prep that property to avoid, if a freeze happens, the pipes burst, then you have a bigger situation and you are going to have to, relook at the numbers. There's going to be damage, all of that. Um, so I'm reminding them. And then for that one, I stepped in, and then when I looked at it, they actually did not have a shutoff valve. I called this, the water was with the city, and I called the city, and they had to actually shut it off in their office in order to help basically shut the water off to be able to stop water coming in from the meter. Um, and so if, for example, pipe would have burst, if their office was not open, it just would have been running water. There's no stopping it unless you start digging it up and creating a shut off valve. So, um, I mean, that's where when you're buying property again, you want to say, hey, where is the shut off valve? Find out what they're doing, all of that. So, again, it's not your responsibility at the buyer, but I like to go the extra mile because I want to see the transaction succeed. And so I am going to interfere and see how I can help. All right. As a landlord, what do you do if the property is tenant occupied? My last job was in property management. At this point, um, we're getting close to where I left that job, um, 7, 8 years ago now. Um, but so I have experience from that, but obviously being a landlord over the past years, here's the thing. I have 6 different property managers, so I am communicating with them right now, making sure that they have strong processes for helping with the properties that they have a role in. Um, but then at the same time, I am wanting to make sure that, you know, ultimately the buck stops with me, the homeowner, the property owner, right? All right, so again, we're insulating the exterior pipes on those. We are removing hose bibs, or we are communicating to tenants to remove the hoses from the exterior bibs. And then we're covering those hose spigots right outside. Um, we are encouraging tenants to protect plants and the pets, right? So this is obviously some of the tenants have pets, but this is not the time for them to be leaving pets outdoors. Um, so what we do is we encourage them to do a pencil line thin drip. So if the by the street is where the meter is, we want them to drip the furthest from the meter, because we want that water running through the whole line system. We want them to drip a pencil line drip from the hot section. So, if it's one of those faucets where you have, the 2 different ones, you want it to come from the hot side. Or if it's one, you have to have it pointed toward the hot section. This is important because it actually it overall helps if you're dripping from the hot. We encourage them to open the cabinets again under the sinks in the kitchen, in the bathrooms. We want them opening the cabinets so that we want them to run the heat again. Um, at a minimum, we want it to where that those pipes are getting, access to the heat. Same thing with the attic. We want them to open the attic just a little bit. If they have to prop something in there so that there's a little bit, so that there's access to the heat going in there. Um, Ultimately, we want them to keep the house heated. But we look, especially this is a problem in some of the lower income, and this is something that we've had to learn to communicate. Do not use the oven to heat the house. So put the oven on 400 and then keeping the front of it open. That is not safe. That can cause a lot of issues, and it's not safe for anyone in the house to do that. And so, we remind them, do not use the oven to heat the house. And then if you're going to use space heaters, people love to use that. It needs to be 3 feet away from anything. And then do not put it on top of furniture. So they have to be very careful. I have a property right now that the property next door to it was burned down because of a space heater. And it's been 3 years and they still haven't fixed it because there's all these issues that they're going through. So that's a very real reminder for me on this topic. So they should be using space heaters carefully and sparingly. This is also where they want to reduce any drafts. So if the doors or the windows if drafts come in, one, you as a landlord should be, fixing this outside of cold weather opportunities. But this is where, weather stripping for windows and for doors will help reduce any drafts of the cold weather. Now let's talk about some additional things. In New Orleans, which is where I'm based out of, it is very common for people to have the water heater outside, like in a little lean-to shack attached to the house. This is where you would want them to look at putting a little heat lamp on that. And if you are, for example, on the North Shore, which is a suburb of New Orleans, and you have wells, like a well pump outside, we just put one in on one of our properties. So we actually went and made sure it had insulation on it so that it was covered and not exposed. You can also look at doing, so I'm talking the entire pump itself, but you can also look at doing a heat pump on that. And then also, if you have a washing machine that is exterior, same thing. You either want to do a heat pump, or you want to drain the water there. You want to just make sure that those things are being protected, because all three, those situations, you would even want to, I'm not familiar with pools, but I even be thinking about what would you do for a pool pump, stuff like that. Those are more at risk. Another thing is if you have sprinkler systems. I do not keep sprinkler systems at my rental properties, but my primary residence has one. It's the first time I'm dealing with it. It's a new thing we got put into our gardens. So that's something that we're having to winterize and make sure that is protected. And then lastly, a few things when you're telling tenants to drip from the hot water section, to not do a stream, because there's already going to be a lot of pressure, or what's the word? Not pressure. There's going to be a lot of demand on the water supply, and that's actually going to impact the ability to get basically water pressure. And so they don't want to be, wasting it with an entire stream. Again, it needs to be a drip, pencil line drip. And then if there happens to be the worst case scenario, a pipe burst, something like that, this is where your tenant needs to be informed of where the shutoff valve is. And you need to, prepare them that if this is going to happen, then they need to go shut it off at the water valve. Sometimes the water valve, the shutoff water valve whether it's at the well, whether it is at the meter, needs a special type of key. There's two types of keys that I drive around with. One of them's like real small, the other one's like a T-bar handle, and then otherwise I'm using like a wrench to close it. Whatever that property needs, your tenant needs to have such things. It needs to stay with the property, and you need to, when you're communicating with them, you need to show them, hey, let's go out to the meter in the event something like this happens, because Lord knows it's not going to happen in the middle of the day. It might happen at night, or it might happen in the morning. I don't know, like when things start to thaw a little bit. But the reality there is they need to be able to do that, because that can stop further damage. And you need buy-in from your tenant, because you can have landlord's insurance, but they need, this is where renter's insurance is really important. At the end of the day, if there's water flooding through the house, it's their contents that are at risk. And we want to eliminate, them having to go find somewhere else to something else. Like we want to eliminate damage, because it will impact them. It's going to impact the roof over their head. It's going to impact their contents. And as much as we can do it, we need buy-in from them for them to take some responsibility. And so let's just say a pipe burst, there's water gushing. They need to turn the water off at the valve, stop the flow of water. And from there, they need to contact you so that you can work on getting a plumber. It will take time to get a plumber. Plumbers are going to be in high demand during a freeze. And so those expectations need to be communicated. Again, time is of the essence, at least to prevent further damage. So these things are important. If you have properties that are tenant occupied, you need to be communicating these expectations, and you need to ask them, will you be home during this freeze? Because if it is tenant occupied, but that tenant is traveling, that can cause issues. This was not from a freeze, but I had a tenant was gone for a week, comes back to the property, and their entire yard is flooded. It was a situation when the root had busted the plumbing line in the yard, and so it was flooding the yard. But the tenant had been gone so long that it had flooded the neighbors' yards. it had flooded, basically to the block behind them. Like it was a big deal. And it was because they were gone. Now, this wasn't freeze related, but it just shows the point that the damage can be much greater. Thankfully, this was an outside situation and not, for example, just water flooding through the house while someone is gone for days. If the tenant is not there, then you need to look at treating this as if it's a vacant property. I'm trying to think through some final things here is that, ultimately, how you approach this will determine how, ultimately you can't stop Mother Nature. You can do the best that you can. Sometimes some life is just going to life and things are going to happen. But communication is key here with your tenants. Again, you need to be communicating with them. Don't just be like, oh, they know what they need to do. No, no, no. You need to take control in the sense of having conversation leadership and leading and talking through expectations and showing them. Don't just assume they know what to do. All right. You need to be walking them through it and checking in on them. The other thing there is your property managers don't just assume they have a process. You need to talk to them. Hey, what is your process? What do you need me to do? What properties need what? How can I help? Because yes, you're paying them to manage the property, but it is literally a joint effort to be able to succeed here. Look, I'm from the South. So as I started, and I opened up this with I'm from the South. We do not get cold weather like this very often. So, any tips from folks who are up north, look, we don't have salt trucks. We're not used to the normal processes. I'm curious any tips that you have. Put in the comments below. Help us Southerners out here. We always freak out whenever there's cold weather because, again, we're not used to it. Schools shut down, roads shut down, all of that. But those are my tips. As a Southern property owner, landlord, these are the things that I'm working on to protect my properties. So I wish you guys the best during this cold weather. And look, when this happens, when I heard the weather was starting to, the news was starting to get out that it was going to be cold. That is immediately when I started working on all the properties. I myself have a lot of properties that we have to get through. So I just started dividing up the list and we divide and conquered and set things up. Ultimately, I shared a story like this on the radio yesterday. Last year in January 24, we had a major freeze. And so we were prepping all the properties. I had 21 vacant properties at time, all within the different phases, bought them. They were in between tenants. They were being sold, for rent, whatever, under construction, whatever that looks like. 21 of them. So we were going around and only one of them had an issue, but it was a man-made issue. And that man-made issue was that the shut-off valve on this property was difficult. What I should have done is we should have just dug up the line and actually created a better shut-off valve. But instead, what we did was we went ahead and just dripped the pipes on a vacant house. I do not love the idea of dripping a pipe on a vacant house. I should have instead turned off the line, flushed the line of the excess water, because what happened was someone had gone and dripped the pipe, dripped the faucet. So when I went to go turn it off, what I realized, I walked in, the entire sink was completely full, overflowing in the kitchen. The cabinets were soaked, the countertops were soaked. It was an entire mess. And it was a man-made problem because the person who went and dripped the faucet for me, they didn't know that the last person that had been there was a cleaner. And the cleaner had stopped both of the parts of the sink because I guess they used it with the mop, and it hadn't been unplugged. And so basically that stream was just collecting water that whole time. And that freeze lasted a few days. And so by the time we got to it, it was now flooding the kitchen. Sadly, out of the 21 properties, that was the one that was going to be rented out in just like 10 days. And so we had to act fast. I immediately had to get guys in there to start doing repairs and fixing the issue. Immediately, we put dehumidifiers in there to start dealing with the moisture issues. And man, it was a headache and wasn't even from the dang freeze. So be mindful of human error. Do your best to do as best as you can and communicate as effectively as possible. Again, not all things are common sense. All right, guys, wish you the best, cheering you on. This is video number 5 out of 100 here in 2025. Keep subscribing, tuning in, following along, because I'm continuing to bring you in stuff that is as helpful as possible here in 25. Appreciate you guys.